microphone.
Sounds like a plan. Aww. It's a dog waterer. I will unplug it right now.
I used to have one of those for my cat. I hadn't noticed it. That's a good pickup, Eric.
I've had those at like every meeting, and every time like somebody's gonna say something about the water fountain that's right next to the computer, but no one has, so I'm like, I guess they can't hear it. I also have a fish tank in the other room that I can't unplug. Hopefully that's not where it's coming from.
Evening.
Coming from the children of the corn.
No, it's not corn. It's wheat.
Okay, all right.
How we all doing?
Good.
I like the sort of vague, slight bobbing of the head, Megan. That's good.
Yep.
Has it been a day that's like today was already a week, as was yesterday? Has anyone else had that? Right.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Have a lot of people been coming in still, or did most people do absentee? Yeah.
Wow.
That doesn't surprise me. There were so many absentees. Wow.
Hopefully.
Hey, Eric or Megan, were you able to talk to the applicant about the stormwater study at all? Are they going to be able to address some of the things that are brought up in that? Have they seen that, had it long enough, I guess, to?
They said that they would like to reach out to Woodard and Curran directly and have a conversation with them before they issue a formal response to it. They said a lot of the info that's in there is pretty straightforward, and then others will take a little bit more time to address. So in short, we don't have a response from them, and I don't think we will for tonight. We just got that at like 11:30 today. I forwarded it like as soon as it came in my inbox, pretty much.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
I should hit broadcast, right? Then Eric can say hi.
All right. So who do we, let's see, we're expecting at least one more person?
We're expecting Dan and
Two more people.
Curran. Yeah.
Got it. Well, you sound like you're in the bottom of a well.
That's the description I was looking for earlier.
I can see all of us on the screen back there.
Yeah.
Besides Steve, did anyone else say that they were not going to be present?
John Engler, formerly.
Right. He stepped down, but.
Other than that, I haven't heard from anyone else that they won't be here.
Is Darren on?
I don't see him yet.
I don't either.
I'm pretty sure he won't be here.
We're still shy 1 minute, but. Although not anymore.
So I've got a window open right next to me. Is that any noise causing any problems for anybody? I can shut it.
If it feels like it gets too loud, you can just mute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't want to be a disturbance.
Oh, I might hear some birds. Maybe it is.
Oh, do you really? Okay, I'll shut it.
I don't know if it's from you or not.
Probably. There we go.
My dog was just going crazy. That's why I got up like a second ago.
Better than Eric's cricket.
Yeah.
I listen to him all day long, so I don't even hear him anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Right? I'm going to give we're 1 minute past. I'm going to give 1 more minute and then we'll start.
Okay. I just checked my email. I don't have anything from anyone, so.
Okay. Okay, so that's 2 gone. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Planning Board, Auburn, Maine, for July 14th, 2020. Getting started, I think we could start with a roll call, please.
Evan Sear.
Dana Staples?
Riley Bergeron.
Stacey LeBlanc.
Justin? So I'm Matthew Duvall, Chair. Justin, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Justin Poirier. I'm the new Urban Development Specialist.
Okay, great. So you are not on the board.
Okay. No, I'm not.
You
No,
are-
I'm
Okay,
city staff.
got it. Thank you.
I'm not replacing John.
I didn't know. We just had a new guy. So we have 3 full board members with us tonight and 2 associate members. So for at least the first item here, unless somebody comes, we will, I propose that we elevate both Mr. Bergeron and Mr. Staples to act as full members, which would give them voting privileges and the ability to make motions. Second item on our agenda are the minutes from May 12th. Comments, motions, thoughts?
I make a motion to accept.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I second that.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
where I wasn't there, I would think I should abstain from this vote, right?
Okay, you can do that.
Everyone
Okay.
has to agree then to
Huh?
approve them.
Or do we all? I mean, I can vote for it, but I just wasn't there, so wasn't a
What
member
was
yet.
that again?
Just if there's only 4 people voting, everyone has to have a yes vote or a no vote.
Got it. So, shall we vote?
Mr. Bergeron,
In favor?
Mr. Sear,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes. If it's about the agenda, I wasn't there for that one, so I'm not sure if you want me on that.
maybe we should table the May 12th meeting minutes until next month when Stephen is back.
When Steve and Dan are here to,
Yeah, I think that's a good plan.
okay, so,
I'd make a motion to table that until the next meeting.
Second.
okay, Megan?
Mr. Bergeron,
Yes.
Mr. Sear,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Staples,
Yes.
Chairman Duval.
Yes. Okay, this one we can do, however, the June 9th meeting minutes.
I
Any,
make a motion to accept.
Second.
okay, any discussion? No, Megan?
Mr. Bergeron,
Yes.
Mr. Sear,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Staples,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So at this time, we come to item number 3 on our agenda. This is a special exception public hearing. The City of Auburn School Department is proposing the construction of the new Edward Little High School building and associated parking, drives, track, and field facility, tennis courts, athletic fields on the existing site located at 77 Harris Street in the urban residential zoning district. So before we get started, I know Mr. Sear, you had something you wanted to.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as many people know, I'm an employee of the Auburn School Department, and I happen to work at the current Edward Little High School building. All municipal officials are required to refrain from undertaking actions that would constitute conflict of interest under state and local law. That's defined by a 10% fiduciary interest, and unless we're going to get some sort of dividends as employees on this, I don't think that's going to happen. So I don't think my position represents a conflict of interest, but state statute and local ordinance also requires that we refrain from perceived conflict of interest or impartiality. To that end, I believe I can be impartial on this subject. However, this will require action of the board to determine whether or not they believe I can continue to act on this item.
Okay, so Any discussion on that from the board? Or shall I say, actually, before that, can we take one moment, seeing we have someone who's just arrived, Mr. Finnegan?
Hi, guys. Sorry for the delay here.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you joined us. We were just discussing, Mr. Sear has brought up the notion that he is a municipal employee. He works for the school department. And so there could be a perceived conflict of interest in his working on this particular item. He does not have a 10% fiduciary interest in the project. And he believes that he can work without, that there is no conflict of interest for him, and he can proceed and discuss this item with impartiality. Now you're caught up, and we can bring this to discussion for the rest of the board.
I was just going to say that I think that Mr. Sear is more than welcome to join this conversation. I think that the conflict of interest, if there's any, is I think we all share as taxpayers of Auburn. We want this high school to turn out as good as it possibly can. So his status as an employee, in my mind, doesn't really enter into the conversation.
Do any other members have thoughts? Agree, disagree?
I agree.
I agree as well.
Okay, as do I. Unless anybody has any further comments, I think we need to take a vote stating that we all believe that Mr. Sear should be part of this conversation.
I'd make the motion to accept Mr. Sear into the conversation and to allow him to his full voting privileges.
Okay, thank you.
I second that.
Okay.
Mr. Bergeron,
Yes.
Mr. Sear,
I am not allowed to vote on this.
correct. Mr. Finnegan,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Staples,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. Okay, at this point, now we can proceed. I think we'd like to do a staff report.
Okay. So as you know, the proposal is for the new Edward Little High School. It includes siting the new high school building to the south of the existing high school on the 60-acre lot. They're expecting the construction to take about 2 years and will continue to occupy the existing high school until construction of the new high school is completed, which they're anticipating to be around the summer of 2023. As we discussed in the staff report, they're just about doubling the building footprint, impervious area, and parking spaces with the new construction. They're proposing to keep 3 of the 4 current public street entrances to the high school. The northeasterly access at Forest Ave is proposed to be closed with a new cul-de-sac termination. And they're proposing to reconstruct the Harris and Auburn Heights accesses into the site. We've had a couple of neighborhood meetings. The most recent one was on June 23rd, and we provided a breakdown of the comments that we received at that meeting in your staff report. We sent out about 244 abutters notices for this meeting, so we expected that there will be a lot of additional comments that are brought up at the meeting that the board will want to consider as you go through your deliberations. And it looks like we have 1 or 2 abutters here, so hopefully more will join in as we get going. Just to give you an update on the items that we discussed in the staff report, at the last abutters meeting, neighbors and one of the counselors had asked for some architectural renderings looking at the site from the neighborhood and or looking at the neighborhood from the site. And we had thought that this may be something that they could put together for this planning board meeting, but it sounds like it's not going to be available for tonight. So I think the planning board should determine if this is something that you think would be valuable to have as you review the proposal. There was a request for a street light in the newly proposed cul-de-sac at Forest Ave, just to help alleviate some neighbor concerns in the area. I'm still running this by the police department to see if it's something that they would support for safety. I don't think we'll have any issues with them saying, no, we don't want a street light there. And the Abutters did request that. And the property owner at Harris and Fairmount had some concerns about a cellar drain and some driveway drainage issues. And the consultant was able to go out there and talk with the property owner. And it sounds like they came up with a solution that will hopefully address those drainage issues. And I believe that Abutters here tonight as well. We noted in the staff report that there was a comment from the airport manager about adding some red lights to the tops of the poles at the tennis courts in the event that life flight may have to land at the high school. When we wrote the condition, we had thought it was something, I guess, that was mandatory for safety reasons, but the airport manager reached out and said it's something that he would like to see at the high school, but not really something that's mandatory. And if we require it for the high school, it may set a precedent for requiring it for other light poles in the city. So the language is written in your staff report as a shall, but it's really up to the planning board whether or not you feel it's something that would be important at the high school. One of the bigger items that we discussed was traffic. Staff felt that another traffic analysis would be important, looking at the increase in traffic at Harris and Auburn Heights, especially with the Forest Ave entrance into the high school being terminated. We had a meeting with the school yesterday to go over some of these items, and they gave us a pretty good breakdown of how traffic flows in and out of the site. And I think it would be helpful tonight for the planning board to hear that traffic pattern from the school, from their perspective, about what they see every day. They also talked about the site distance and issues with buses and the nature of some of those crashes that occurred that were mentioned in the traffic report. They're also going to have their traffic engineer, Randy Dutton, who I saw on the attendee list, here for the meeting as well to answer any questions that the planning board has about traffic. We talked about site circulation for the fire department, and the school has discussed this with David O'Connell, the fire prevention officer, and he's all set with the site circulation. We also talked about an addressing plan due to the new location of the high school, and the school already has this underway with Rosemary, our addressing officer, and it sounds like they're just working internally right now to figure out the best way to re-address the new building. The off-street parking and loading provisions require that there be loading spaces at the high school. There's a large loading area that they're proposing to the rear east side of the building, the new school, and there's plenty of room in that area for maneuvering of tractor trailers, buses, fire trucks, but they do not want to paint parking lines in this area because they're worried that people will use it for parking. So they said that the drivers of the tractor trailer trucks will know where to load and unload and where to park, and there will be room for other vehicles to maneuver around them, and that students shouldn't be back there anyways. But the ordinance just requires that there be loading spaces, so something the planning board may want to discuss a little further with them. We had some questions about the photometric plan that was provided. It didn't show any light spillage from the parking areas onto adjacent properties. I emphasize parking areas because that's the ordinance requirement. There's a small amount of foot candles shed onto the Muro and Harris properties from the proposed poles entering the high school. The fixtures that they're proposing are sharp cutoff fixtures, and they're not going to cast any light onto the homes themselves, just the driveway areas. And there's Cobra lights in the road currently that probably shed light onto the structures themselves. So they meet the ordinance requirements. It's just going to be a little bit more light than they're used to on their properties. As you know, we're reviewing the stormwater under delegated review. We just received comments back from Woodard and Curran this afternoon. So obviously the applicant has not had time to fully address them and provide updated plans. We took a quick look through the comments and they don't appear to have any changes that I think would substantially alter the site plan, like the placement of the school, parking areas, fields, those sorts of things. But they do require some reworking of the stormwater features on the site, which may require more space and slight alterations to accommodate those. There was one comment about the potential for stormwater to erode a slope and potentially affect one of the adjacent lots. So that's something that we want to make sure is addressed definitely from that stormwater report. So I think this leaves the planning board in one of two positions. First, hear from the applicant and see what they have to say about the staff report that was provided from Woodard and Curran, and then decide, one, if the proposal should be tabled to allow them to rework the stormwater issues for the August meeting, or two, if it can be approved with a condition that stormwater be addressed, provided it doesn't cause any substantial changes to the site plan. There's two waivers that we talked about in the staff report. Building height in the urban residential zoning district is capped at 35 feet. The high school is proposed to be 51 feet. The current high school already exceeds the 35-foot height limit. It's a little over 43 feet. So we recommend the planning board grant the 8-foot waiver to allow the taller high school. And the second was in regards to more than one principal building per lot in a residential zoning district. This is just more of a matter of housekeeping. As the planning board knows, our ordinance doesn't allow more than one principal structure per lot in any residential zoning district. So technically 2 high schools couldn't exist on the parcel at the same time. But where the current high school is proposed to be demolished before or right around the time the new high school is occupied, we just recommend the planning board grant the waiver on this. So where do we stand at this point and how to move forward? One, the planning board will have to determine if those architectural renderings are important for tonight's discussion. Two, we recommend discussing the airport's suggestion of adding red lights to the top of the poles at the tennis ball courts, and note that it's a suggestion and not a requirement as noted in the staff report. Let's hear from the traffic engineer and discuss the traffic flows and report that was provided. 4, granting of those 2 waivers for height and the second principal building. And 5, a stormwater discussion in lieu of the report that was received today. So that's all we have in our update. So happy to take any questions that the planning board has.
Thank you. Questions for staff?
Yeah, Megan, you brought up the loading zone, which was actually something that sort of stuck out to me because it's required for schools, right? And the staff report seemed to indicate that it was not required, although I'm hearing sort of different verbiage tonight with regard to the way you're presenting the report. I am looking at site plan C00-1. Where exactly is that loading zone that you're discussing?
Let's see. He pulled it up yesterday on the plan. I'm trying to picture where he had showed it designated on the plan yesterday.
Okay.
Is it that?
That's where it was.
Is it this there?
Okay, and so I guess what you're saying is the issue is that they don't want to stripe it because the zoning ordinance requires a certain number of loading spaces. Is this the issue? Is this, I'm hearing this correctly?
Right, the ordinance just requires that they be there, and they just don't, it's depending on the size of the building, determines what the dimensions of the loading spaces have to be. But they just don't, they're worried about, and they can speak more to this, but they're worried about striping them specifically because they're worried people will park there or think it's a parking space, or that it's not a parking space, it's a fire lane, and park in another place that they're not supposed to be.
So is the issue that they don't have the proper square footage, or that the proper square footage is there, they just don't want to stripe it?
They just don't want to stripe it. They've
But
got,
it does exist. It meets the size requirements.
yep, and they said yesterday that they don't expect any issues with other vehicles, you know, maneuvering around the, if someone was parked in the loading space, maneuvering around them either.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that the amount of space was actually present to accommodate the ordinance.
Yeah.
So may I have a question?
Yep.
So this is my second meeting, as you know. And I did review the information, and it's pretty thorough in terms of traffic patterns and, you know, the neighborhoods, all that stuff. Where would I find information around pedestrian traffic? So as we know, there is a lot of foot traffic that walks to and from Edward Little. So where would I find information that cares for that piece?
Pedestrian traffic within the high school campus, or?
Coming to and from. So, right, we're talking about like the entrances and caring for as they come in.
They addressed some of that in the staff report with the suggestion to upgrade the sidewalks and the crosswalks.
I saw that.
That was the extent of what they provided for pedestrian flow into and out of the site.
I have an additional question since we're sort of talking about traffic and parking. So under ordinance section 60-607 item 9 states that it basically says that there can't be any parking in a front yard, I guess. And that's the way it basically reads. And so my question is, how is that addressed on this plan? And is that something that would require an additional waiver?
Yeah, I think because we had reviewed this for Coleman's Collision, because they had parking spaces proposed right up against the road. And so as long as they're not proposing parking actually in their front setback, I think was how we interpreted that, and where they're not putting any parking lots or parking spaces in the front setback itself, they're not technically in their front yard, I guess is how we looked at that.
Yeah, and I thought of Coleman's Collision when I was looking at this, but Coleman's was in a different zone. This was specific to residential zones.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I want to make sure we're not leaving any sort of loose ends or.
Yeah, definitely.
With regards to traffic, just was that at Forest or Fairmount? Light.
The termination.
No, the proposed light.
Are they proposing a light?
I don't. There was something that was proposed, and that you said early. It was either a street light.
Oh, I apologize. I thought you were talking about a traffic light.
No,
Yeah,
no.
They're proposing a street light in the cul-de-sac on Forest.
Got it. Okay.
Neighbors were concerned about where that being dead-ended now. Perhaps some safety.
Yep.
Concerns. So.
Since Mr. Duval brought, I'm sorry to ask so many questions, but you guys know I do every meeting. I did have a question about the creation of the cul-de-sac. And how does that run into, or does that run up against the maximum allowed length of a cul-de-sac in the ordinance? No, it's not in chapter 60, but it's something that we come up against when we look at sort of internal roads on site plan reviews.
I don't know what that dimension is.
It's 600 feet.
Okay.
Okay. And I guess my follow-up question to that is, we're discussing it as part of this site plan, but my assumption is that the creation of the cul-de-sac is not really under review for this site plan because it's not a part of the site. I mean, it's information relevant to the closing off of the driveway out of the school on that side, but this would be taken up as a separate issue at a separate time.
As I view it, Mr. Sear, that as I'm looking at that same sheet, C-001, the cul-de-sac is actually on the school property. So the construction is within the property of the school.
Okay.
Whereas the street, so the whole cul-de-sac then would, my interpretation be that it would, and this may be incorrect, that it would be just the part that's on the property. Is that wrong?
Yeah, I'm just pulled up that section of the ordinance that you're referencing about the 600 feet. And it says that it can be, I don't know the length of the road leading up to this cul-de-sac, but if it is greater than 600 feet, the planning board can find that the greater length will not create a hazard based on availability of hydrants, firefighting equipment, or the use of abutting properties. So I think if we can have them just confirm the total length of that and then perhaps have the fire department chime in. They already looked at the plan and said they were all set, so I assume they are all set with the cul-de-sac, but that's a good point to look at it.
Well, I guess my question is that in order to do that to the road, it would seem that the cul-de-sac would have to be accepted as part of the city street, which would require a different process than what we would do. What are the implications? So, what are the implications if we were to approve the site plan with the cul-de-sac on the site, and the city council were to say not accept the road? Right. Okay. All right.
Any additional questions for staff?
Yeah, so stormwater, we just got that today, and so I apologize. I'm not as familiar with it as I probably should be. So I have two questions. They talked about some drainage, water treatment, as staff pointed out earlier in this discussion. One thing that was also brought up was sort of the need to move a few lights. And I guess in reading through the stormwater report, I wasn't sure exactly which lights those were. And I just want to make sure that if we were to approve this with a condition that the stormwater plan be reviewed by staff, does moving those lights as indicated in the stormwater plan sort of create light pollution off the site? Are those internal lights? I had a difficult time finding exactly where those lights were positioned on the site.
Yeah, it could. They'd have to update their foot candle plan to show us where those lights are. I believe the stormwater report referenced the HydroCAD model when they used the points on the site plan. So I don't know exactly what points they were referencing. I know they had referenced potential drainage concerns to abutting properties as well. So I was hoping the applicant could chime in on that. And I know that they're going to have a conversation with Woodard and Curran about the stormwater as well. So we would rely on the engineering department to sign off on those comments from Woodard and Curran.
And the other question I had with regard to the stormwater plan is, which abutter is the abutter they're discussing as being most affected by erosion, possible erosion?
That I don't know, because it was a reference from the HydroCAD model. So okay. Unless I go back to the HydroCAD model and try and sift through all those calculations, and I wasn't quite sure, but I have a feeling that the applicant will know which one they were referencing.
And then I apologize. One final question is with regard to screening on the east side of the school. So they'll be at the top of a substantial slope. And looking through the planting plans, I didn't see sort of our typical dense evergreen screening on that side. What was the reasoning behind that?
I believe the side that you're referencing is where they're putting in the new field complex. Stormwater.
I am looking at the easterly side, the eastern side of the school, I guess. I'm looking at the planting plan, and I'm seeing a few pieces here and there, but it's at the top of a fairly steep slope as well.
Is that the Minot Avenue side?
Yeah, I know. These plants, I'll tell you, it's been a while. I've been on the board for 8 years, and at first I started getting annoyed when we got the little plans, but now I've become accustomed to them, and it's really difficult and unwieldy to show these things around. So here's the courtyard in the building. So I'm talking about sort of the easterly side of the building.
Yeah. Okay.
Or the same side that the loading zone is on, actually. Since we just figured that out, I was wondering why there wasn't more provision for screening that we would typically see on a project like this.
Yeah, I'm trying. I know we had. I'm trying to think if that was the one that we discussed with at the neighborhood meetings. We had a discussion with them about their need to grade right up to the property line, and that they would be doing a little bit of replanting over there. But I remember concerns over on the ballpark side, but I don't remember. Yeah, I don't think I'm. Right. Yeah, I don't know if those concerns apply to this side of the property as well.
Yeah, I understand the issue of buffering. I mean, the screening is not it's a visual buffer. It's a fairly, the slope is substantial there, so there could be a wide buffer, but if it's not reaching up that slope, then that could present some site issues. But I asked because it's something that we would typically see on a project like this that was missing from this one. So. All right. Great. And Chairman Duval, I promise I'm done with staff questions now.
Oh, no, that's fine, because I actually have some. So in the staff report, I just want to make sure that I have this correct. With the site distances, Fairmount is out of compliance for any large vehicles, correct? In both directions?
I believe that was the case.
And in one direction for cars?
I believe that was the case, correct, yeah.
And then Harris is one direction for large vehicles.
Right. Yeah. And Randy Dutton, their traffic engineer, is here as well. So he can speak more to all of that information, the site distance concerns and the nature of the crashes involving the larger vehicles. It sounds like they were just little fender benders, but it's just, they all get reported. So it's noted as a crash, even if it's a little fender bender.
Right. Any further questions for staff?
You know, Mr. Duval, I said I was done, and then you remind me of a question I had when I was looking through this.
That's why we're all here.
Of course, we're waiting tonight, and if staff thinks this should wait till the discussion of the traffic study, I'm absolutely happy with that. I know that we'll be getting more information there, but did the applicant provide any information on internal traffic patterns and movements with regard to large-scale events? So we're reviewing this as a school, but to the credit of the Auburn School Department and I think the citizens of Auburn, everyone decided that this new school should include a substantial performing arts center and stadium, with the assumption that those would be utilized not just for school events. So my assumption is that we need to look at that use on the property as well. So was any information on that presented to staff?
No, the only information that I recall seeing was the parking, for the increase in parking to accommodate when those large events occur. But other than that, we didn't receive anything from them.
Does the site plan meets the parking requirements for the school? Does it meet the requirements for say an auditorium that is that size, as well as a stadium that's that size?
I believe the parking requirements that they provided were for the school building. I don't think they differentiated between the auditorium and what's inside the school.
Does that present a problem for us as we look at approving a site plan? And the idea that there'd be a use on that site plan that might not, where the parking requirement might not be met?
I didn't think so, because they're proposing to meet the requirements that are the requirements for the high school itself. But that's certainly something that we can discuss with them. I know they've done more than the parking requirements that are needed for the classrooms.
Yeah, I think given that it creates sort of a change in the general use of that area, which I think is great. I personally would like to see those numbers. And if they meet the parking requirements, great. If they don't, I'd still like to know that, so that way we can provide a waiver if needed. I would much rather do things now and say that we did everything correctly and dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's, rather than wait till later. No. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the high school requirement is 4 spaces per classroom. They have 97 classrooms. So that requirement was 388 spaces just to meet the classrooms, and they have 601.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what the square footage is of the auditorium, and
So, are you all set? I had a question. So I looked through the report, and I know earlier you had mentioned something about sidewalk improvements, and I didn't see that when I was reading it. Was that wasn't in the Goral Palmer section? I just want to make sure that those sidewalks are addressed. I went over there this weekend and walked on all of them, and Fairmount and Harris are in pretty rough shape. So I just want to make sure that those are a part of this project.
Yeah, I believe they were recommendations in the Goral-Palmer report, and Harriman included them in the upgrades to the site plan. They showed those raised crosswalks and everything on the site plan sheets.
I think Mr. Staples is speaking to some of the sidewalks beyond the property boundaries, possibly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, all the way to Court.
Right. And we can't include that in the we can't require an applicant to make improvements beyond their property. I guess we can work with them in such a way that they choose to, but we can't require them.
Yeah, I know they're reconstructing the ones internally and the ones at the entrance, but we can hear from the traffic engineer and see what maybe they're willing to do external to the site as well for improvements.
There was discussion as well on Western to possibly include a crosswalk near the entrance to the high school. And there was some discussion as well about how Western was 15.5-foot lanes. And that makes it difficult to put in a bicycle lane. I feel like you could put like one on, or there's an opportunity there at least. I know bike lanes are usually 6 feet, but it'd be nice to have some facilities there, especially where you have the 15.5-foot lanes. I mean, you only need 11 or 12. So. Yeah.
Okay, any further questions, or should we go to the applicant? Seeing no further questions, can we get the applicant in to speak with us?
And I apologize, Adam, was it Scott? Was the other person you wanted to bring in?
Yes, please, Scott Anier, if he's on.
Yeah.
So Megan, how should we do this? Would you like us, those of us from the school department, to introduce ourselves?
Yeah, why don't you do that? That'd be
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us tonight. I'm Adam Hansen. I'm the business manager for the school department. We're very excited to bring this project to you. And so I have Billy Hunter, our Director of Support Services, here with me in my office. And I'll ask Scott and the Harriman representatives to introduce themselves.
I'm Scott Anier. I'm the principal of Every Little High School, and chances are I'm not going to be able to answer any questions about stormwater runoff. Just going to make sure you guys know that ahead of time.
I'm Frank Crabtree with Harriman Associates, civil engineer, and I will be happy to answer every question I can. I think, Randy, you're the other one here.
Good evening, Randy Dutton with Goral-Palmer. Worked on the traffic pre-feasibility study for this project.
So I think I can share my screen and bring up some drawings that you've been talking about, and go down through the list. I tried to write down everything that was talked about. I probably missed something, but oh, Lisa's here. This is Lisa Sowen. She is the project manager and principal architect on the project. So let me see if we can get some drawings here. Okay, is that visible to everybody?
Seeing your deck. Yep.
The drawing?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, first I'll go to the overview. This, because it's such a big site and we have to break it up into smaller so-called drawings, each of these boxes represents basically a third of the site. And that's why your set of drawings is such a big pile, because we have to have it readable for the contractors. So as you know, the overall site, and I won't go through any of the overview really, because you've already been looking at it, and Megan's done a good job of disseminating everything. Let me just go down through the list quickly and answer the questions, and then we can go back and talk about specifics too. When we were talking about the light poles with the red beacons on the top, right now there are 4 light poles here around the track and football field. Those are actually depressed. You know, the way the track is set down right now in a low spot, it'll still be down in a low spot. We're going to raise it about 3 feet, but it still will be down there. So those poles won't be very high on the site. Right here, we have the baseball field with 6 light poles. Those will be up on a high point. The baseball field sets right where the existing high school is. So we can't start building the baseball field until we demolish the high school. That's really the high point of the site, and the only light poles that will really be very high, well, geographically, they'll all be quite tall. Then we have a few light poles here. I think there's 8 on the tennis courts. And again, that's down over the bank, and they're shorter poles. So I'm not sure, I guess we'll need to discuss where we want to put those light pole, those red beacons, if at all. They're not that expensive, so it's not a real big deal to put them on there. But like somebody said, if we start putting light poles on these for the sake of general aviation traffic, do you need to do that for other sites all over the community, wherever you have a big parking lot and tall light poles? So I think we can wait and hear whatever comes out of that discussion. But these are the poles here that are the highest geographically on the site. Loading zone we talked about, which is over here. And the reason that I was objecting to painting any lines is right now we have traffic flow coming in here from, say, the tractor trailer truck, fire truck, potentially a school bus, but not necessarily many buses back here. And loading would occur mostly right at these doors. There is not a raised loading dock. This is at grade with ADA access in through this doorway. So any loading occurs here. A tractor trailer can pull up, can back up towards these doors, unload, load, and then circulate around and go back out. This is 110 feet across here, which is plenty wide for a tractor trailer or a fire truck turning. I guess my problem with painting some stripes in here in some direction is that it starts to limit. If somebody comes in and there's nobody there, do they start to feel like, well, I can't cross those lines? I don't know. So I just felt that there was plenty of maneuvering room, and the truck drivers will know where they're headed to this door, whether they park, this way or this way at this point. as long as they're not sitting there for days, I would think would be fine with a school. I'm kind of bouncing around because of that. My notes were scattered here. The cul-de-sac, I think, Eric, you mentioned already. I checked while you were talking about something else, and yeah, this is only about a 400-foot length on Forest Avenue now. So we're adding about 150 feet or so in this cul-de-sac. So I think the whole thing will still be under 600 feet. And as far as the light, we have not proposed a light here. It came up in a neighborhood meeting. We're certainly going to put a light out here somewhere for the sake of not creating a dark pocket. But that is still being discussed with the fire department, with the police department, apparently. Megan was saying, so we're waiting on that, and we'll definitely do whatever they recommend. We talked a little bit about sidewalks and pedestrian traffic. I can blow it up to a bigger scale drawing, but as a whole, we're providing a sidewalk from Western Avenue up this side, all the way up through to Harris, and also a branch that goes up here to Fairmount. We aren't doing anything at this point off-site on either of these streets. I guess that's up for discussion if somebody would like something done there, but we have not yet proposed anything there. And then internally, we have a lot of sidewalks along most of these drives. This is the parent drop-off loop here, and we have sidewalks along that. This is the bus drop-off loop here, and we have a sidewalk along that for drop-off. We have other sidewalks that allow movement from various parts of the site. And then this is really a sidewalk and maintenance sort of drive down to the tennis courts, which sit down at a lower level down in here. The extension of, I think this is Prospect Street. Currently, there's a gravel walk drive that comes in through here right now. We're going to leave that as is, connect into it so that if there is reason, people can circulate in and out through this direction. I believe we have shown a gate right here at this point, just to make sure that it isn't used improperly. So that's access again down to these courts. And we talked about screening a little bit. Let me go to, let's see, we'll go over this one near the building. This is a little too far to get down to Minot Avenue, which is down here. As Eric said, the woods line will be, right now the woods line is up in here. And this is the field, the sports field that's there currently at the high school. We're taking the woods line back down to here. Still, there is a lot of woods, and I'm saying somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 feet of natural woods as a buffer down to the properties along Minot Avenue. We hadn't intended to do anything up this embankment. That would be quite expensive if we were trying to put a lot of buffering along this edge, and we didn't feel it was necessary because we do have so much wooded buffer left in here. Let's talk a little bit about stormwater. And I'll go back to the overview. Just getting the comments at noon today. There are quite a few comments from Woodard and Curran. As I think Eric said, or Megan, it didn't appear that any of the comments were that big, but cumulatively, I've got some time that I've got to spend answering them. Some of them are very easy to answer. Others require some calculations. There may be some tweaking to some of the stormwater features, but I don't see any wholesale changes. The couple of the things that were mentioned, and let's talk about this one, I think. The light poles, oops, wrong drawing. That's the wrong drawing. Let me see if I can get the right drawing here. Yeah, it's this one. Okay, we have, we're treating as much as we possibly can. There's a lot of new impervious area and developed area on the site, even though there's a lot there now. We've got, I believe, 10 of these underground chamber systems that you can see here. We've got, they're scattered around the site. Most of them are right around the building. We've got a couple in the ball field areas. We've got 3 open vegetated stormwater basins, which will be dry most of the time, but those are open basins. And both of the artificial turf fields, which are down in this lower area, are also treatment beds beneath them. So we're doing a lot of treatment. It's interesting to try to put this many beds underground when there's so much going on here. These islands, most of them have streetlights on them in the parking areas. And I believe what Woodard and Curran was talking about was a pole located on this island and a pole located on this island. I need to look at them vertically, but these beds are quite deep. Easily the island will be of no issue at all sitting on top of those beds, just like the parking lot itself won't be of any issue. I think the poles are also, even with a frost depth of 4.5 feet below the ground, I believe the base of the poles may still be above the chamber level on these 2 beds. I'll have to look at that. At least if it goes into the bed, we may need to spread and move one of the chambers so that the pole can go down between a couple. It isn't a big interference. If these were very shallow beds, then yes, it could be an interference. But I think that's what they're talking about, and I don't believe we're going to have an issue there. There was another comment about, let's see, maybe this one, about stormwater off the easterly side. And I don't have the, probably could bring it up since oh, no, I don't even have it here. I don't want to take the time to go find it, but the stormwater plan along this easterly side, we've broken up, because it's so long in stretch along Minot Avenue from end to end. I broke it up into 4 large watersheds, all draining down the hill to the properties behind Minot Avenue. So it was sort of arbitrary. I mean, each section is its own watershed, but they all collectively go down to this one street. If you look at the numbers, we are negative, less flow, peak flow rate in all 3 of them, much greater than the small increase in flow in one of them. So in the aggregate, and this is what I mentioned in the application, in the aggregate, just like all the rest of the site, our flows going off after development are quite a lot lower than they are before development. However, in this, if we focus in on this one area, it is a little bit greater. And that's where Woodard and Curran said something should be explained there. And you would ask about the properties there, and it looked as though It's coming in behind the big, the old mill, the barn, as a lot of that area. It's not coming in behind somebody's residence. So there's 2 or 3 properties there that are owned by the city, or is that Miracle Enterprise large property. And again, it's a very small increase of 1 CFS, and all the other subcatchments that were sort of arbitrarily selected along this whole route are quite a bit more negative. So I personally don't think that is a significant issue. I will address it with the Woodard and Curran question, though, when it comes to writing a response. Oh, on the rendering, that is something that Lisa and I wanted to show you. Oops. Oh. We did a rendering back about a year ago, and it was done from Harris Street, looking in towards the building. When we worked with our geotechnical firm and realized that this end of the building was not, the soils underneath it were not good, we rotated the building so that now it sits more over this way. Parking lot still sits out front of it like this. But so we are looking at here is a rendering. The building didn't change. It's like we picked it up and just moved it and slid it over here, rotated it about 90 degrees so that it lines up more with the existing high school, which is just off the sheet here. But otherwise, you're looking at the same type of thing that you'd be looking at in a rendering. The parking, the fields, and the building are virtually not changed. They've just been rearranged a bit. So we just wanted to point that out, that it isn't that we haven't done a rendering, it's just that it has shifted since we did it last year. I think maybe it's time, Randy, if you would like to talk about traffic, and I don't probably have any drawings here other than this one that's sort of an overview, or I can take the drawings off and stop sharing the screen. So I'm not sure, Megan, what you want to do, but I think probably Randy ought to have some time to discuss.
Yeah, if that's okay with the chair, I'd say open it up to Randy, and you could leave your plan on the screen for reference.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, absolutely. I just assumed you were handing it off with.
That sounds good. Good afternoon, board. Thank you for having me. Just take a brief review through the pre-feasibility traffic evaluation that we did. The first thing that we looked at was the increase in trip generation that we expected from the existing conditions. We did that based on, the ITE trip generation manual. We came up with an increase of approximately 75 trip ends, where 1 vehicle in and 1 vehicle out equals 2 trip ends. So 75 in the AM, 25 in the PM adjacent street, which is basically the commuter time. And then it would be higher, around 52 during the peak hour of the generator, which is basically when school, gets out. None of those warrant the need for a Maine DOT traffic movement permit because they're less than the threshold of 100, or actually 99. So a DOT permit is not required. One of the other things that we looked at, and I've heard it mentioned a few times, is the site distance. We did a site distance review at Western Ave and Auburn Heights, and then Harris coming out onto Court Street, and then Fairmount coming onto Court Street. Auburn Heights coming out onto Western Avenue, we checked all three of the locations for both passenger vehicles as well as what we call larger vehicles, which in this case, in the case of a school, would be a bus. It's slightly higher for larger vehicles or slightly longer sight distance required than it is for passenger vehicles. Starting at Western Avenue, there wasn't any restrictions that kept it from meeting the criteria. It's 25 miles per hour, and the city has a requirement of 250 feet. We could see, in excess of, 300 feet in both directions for a passenger vehicle, and then in excess of 400 feet where 375 is required for larger vehicles. So there were no restrictions from meeting the criteria at Western Avenue. Where the restrictions started to come into play were at exiting Harris onto Court Street, and also exiting Fairmount onto Court Street. Exiting Harris, passenger vehicle was fine. However, a larger vehicle looking right, down Court Street, if you will, was restricted. The criteria is 375, and we got about 350. So it's about 25 feet short. The restriction is a horizontal restriction. Basically, there's an embankment there with a residence on top. So that's most likely not going to get fixed or change. And I'll talk about Fairmount, and then I'll talk about possibilities of what we can do to address them. Coming out of Fairmount onto Court, it was restricted looking left for a passenger vehicle, and it was restricted looking both left and right for a larger vehicle. And again, it's a combination of a horizontal curve with an embankment and also a vertical curve of a hill. So there's not much really that can be done there. So let's talk about the larger vehicles first. The only place that a larger vehicle really met the criteria was Western Avenue. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, is that approximately 99% of the buses come to and from the site on Western Avenue. So our recommendation would be basically to require all buses to use Western Avenue. And that would address 3 out of the 4 restrictions, if you will, for sight distances. It would address all of the restrictions for larger vehicles if buses were allowed, if buses were required to use Western Avenue. Now, the smaller buses, those typically are considered passenger vehicles. So if it's a small, short bus, then they could still use Harris, because Harris was fine for passenger vehicles. But other than that, the larger buses, we recommend using Western. As far as the passenger vehicles, the only restriction that we found for passenger vehicles was exiting Fairmount onto Court. Now, obviously, it's a public way now, and you really can't tell people they can't use it. But what you can do is kind of direct them to the locations that you do want them to use. the site is already oriented so that Harris is, if you're leaving the site, Harris is the straight shot, if you will. And you'd really have to kind of take a right if you wanted to go down Fairmount. What I would suggest is that you actually put a sign, erect a sign as you're approaching that intersection and leaving the site that says to Court Street, and you direct them down Harris. So that would kind of direct all passenger vehicles out Harris down to Court Street. And, you know, if somebody wants to take Fairmount, they certainly can. But you've directed them in the location where it's the safest. One of the other things that you could possibly do is erect signs before you turn onto Fairmount that says local traffic only. That way, when somebody say they haven't been to the site before and they're going to one of the special events and they happen to go out that way, well, they know, first of all, go to Court Street, you go straight because you've erected a sign that points them in that direction. And they also would see signs that say local traffic only, and they know they're not local traffic. So that would address that. So we think all of the site distance issues can be addressed, not necessarily fixed, but can orient the people that are visiting or using the campus to the appropriate locations. We did check to see whether or not there are any what's called high crash locations in the area. And a high crash location is, it has something called a critical rate factor of 1 or greater, and it has 8 or more crashes within a 3-year time period. The time period we looked at, the latest available, is 2017 through 2019. There is one high crash location. It's down at the bottom of Court Street and Goff Street. And that had a critical rate factor of 1.81 and had 13 collisions. We looked at it, and there doesn't seem to be a pattern that would really be exacerbated by the school. So there's really not much that we think the school is going to do to make that worse. We also took a look at, when there's a school involved, we usually take a look to see if, there's any reported crashes of pedestrians or bicyclists. In this case, there was no pedestrians or bicyclist crashes reported. We also looked at school bus crashes as far as what was available for information. And I do not have the particulars on them, but there were 3 reported collisions that involved school buses, and the school department may be able to shed some light on that. And that's really, it was intended to be like I said, a pre-feasibility traffic evaluation, not a full traffic impact study. So we looked at basically the trip generation to see if it needed a report, to see if it needed permitting from the DOT, and safety evaluation to see if there were any red flags. Be more than happy to answer any questions now, or if you want to wait till the end.
I have questions, so I'll either ask them now or wait to the end. It doesn't matter.
So does the applicant have any additional people who want to speak, or?
The only other thing we haven't gone through is anything to do with the building itself. I know that you're not really making judgments on the building, but we, Lisa would be willing to show some things about the building if you wanted to spend time doing that. But if not, that wasn't something we had to do.
Yeah, I'm here to address questions on the building if there are any. If not, we can focus on the site information that Frank's provided and information Randy's provided. It's completely up to you guys, whatever's helpful.
So I'll throw that out to the board. Does anybody want to hear about the building? So hearing nothing, I think we should go ahead and if the board have questions for any of the applicant in any way, I think go ahead and ask them. So Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you. Yeah, so I actually have a couple of questions. One is, Mr. Dutton, so you were talking about the traffic patterns, and I'm curious if you reviewed your audience from a traffic pattern standpoint. So, how many, cars are we thinking will be under 18-year-olds driving, right? So I completely appreciate signs and direction, but we're looking at our audience, which we're going to be talking about teachers, we're going to be talking about students, we're going to be talking about buses. I would think that would be primarily, I don't know, it's my guess, maybe 65% of the traffic in and out. So from your review, did you review the audience that in the traffic pattern? And you're on mute, Mr. Dutton.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
We didn't look at the audience because typically, although, obviously high school students are less experienced, the traffic is based on drivers. It's assumed that if there is a driver driving a vehicle, that they are legally driving and know how to drive.
Yeah.
That isn't necessarily, like I said, they don't have the experience, but the assumption is that all legal drivers know the rules of the road, and know how to, what signs mean and how to react to the signs and that sort of thing. So that's why typically we don't break it down as far as, the age of the drivers or the experience level. We assume that they all are legal drivers.
Yeah, super fair answer. So my other question too is I am a recipient of the Fairview School parking lot. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that parking lot, but it was redesigned and reconfigured. And as such, it didn't necessarily work out, right? Because of the tight turnarounds from the parent drop-off space. So what ended up happening is a couple things. One is they had to have teachers outside, constantly monitoring traffic flow, and they had to reconfigure the traffic flow too. So I'm sure all good intentions, I'm not sure who did that traffic pattern, best of intentions did not end up turning out that way. So I did look at, and it was super helpful, the visual that was provided from a traffic pattern. So I think it was maybe Mr. Crabtree, you were the one that provided that out to the group. And I'm already seeing similar patterns and flows from traffic within the school. So you have buses coming in, you've got student and faculty parking. It looks like, and I took a quick screen grab of it, you've got tight entrances in and out. So again, I want to understand how, from a navigation standpoint, if it's truly feasible. And again, I come from Fairview School. We all know that was reconfigured after it happened. So I just want to be conscientious of our past and make sure we're not making the same mistakes going forward. And I'm not sure if that's to you, Mr. Dutton, or to Mr. Crabtree, or whom it goes to.
That would probably be Frank. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Randy. I don't know about Fairview School traffic pattern, but I'll just walk you through what we intend. And as far as parking areas, we've discussed a little bit, I believe, with the school department, how they're going to use these these parking areas. But I don't know that there's been any firm policy set yet. But right now, the plan is that this entrance right here, this is the main roadway, which would be Auburn Heights connecting up to Harris. So that is intended to be a smooth, easy to navigate driveway, not quite like they have today, where it's a little confusing for somebody who doesn't know what, hasn't been there before. So off this main hub, we have parents that are dropping off students, would be coming in here.
Okay, I gotcha. All right.
Got it right here? Okay. Parents coming in to drop off. They'd either come in from Western or from Harris, coming in here to drop off along this whole edge. There are numerous places where they can come into the parking in here if somebody is coming to stop and get out and go into the building. This is also, there again, I'm stepping out on a limb here because I'm not sure what the school is planning to do, and maybe they can address this, but I would assume this might be, a group of this might be student parking here, possibly staff parking here. There's enough for students and staff in these three lots, so I just am not sure how they're going to break that up. The buses coming from Western or coming in from Harris would turn into the bus lane here, which is one way, and would be dropping off right here along the same entry walk area. The parents coming in one way in this direction, dropping off, the buses coming in one way in this direction. The buses would then could go out here, or if there were more buses, they could stack up even along this edge if they needed to. So that would be the main daily flow. If there were deliveries would most likely be coming in from this drive, which isn't in the mix of anybody else, out to the back, drop off, turn around, and come right back out. So that stays out of the traffic for everyone else. For the technical education end of the building, which is down here, people, staff, students would come in this way and cut into this area if they needed to come in here for some reason. Otherwise, they would be parking out here and coming in the main doors with everybody else. But this is for any things that are going on out in the CTE area. As far as events, we have a drive that comes down to a very small parking lot here on the lower level with the football field, practice field, concession building, the stadium area down in here. This is intended not to be for the public. And again, I'm not sure how the school will operate, but on a game day, this isn't intended to be for everybody to cram in there if they can. I would see this as more parking for coaches, possibly handicap parking, parking for an ambulance, whatever, down on this lower level. We also have a small lot up here, which is parking for baseball, softball. And again, for any events, other lots will be used by general public, and there are walkways to get to these events. So that's pretty much in a nutshell how we've laid out the circulation.
Okay, yeah, so I do have a quick question. So, from a configuration and a data standpoint, did you review how many buses will be coming in and out of that circular, or kind of like a reverse J, right?
Right here.
Yeah, so how many buses at 210, right, will be being processed through that reverse J? And in conjunction, how many parking spots are also in there, right? So you're going to be looking at, tell me how many parking spots are in that in conjunction with how many buses at 210 will be pulling out at the same time. It seems a little bit, like it could get a little messy, just my opinion.
Well, there again, that's what I was saying. I'm not sure, and I don't know, Adam, if you have, or Scott, if you have a proposal of how to assign parking, and how many buses. I'm not sure how many come at any one particular time. And that's why I said this is the main bus pickup and drop off, but there's also space along this whole edge here for more buses if this needed. If this was a staff parking lot, they could I would think, easily say to the staff, we don't want you leaving until the buses are gone. That way there is no congestion in this area here.
Yeah, just to real briefly, that's where I had envisioned staff parking would be on that side, just because we really want the students in the front to really influence making sure that they're coming through that front entranceway from a security standpoint. And in terms of how many buses, typically at 210, they come in about 3 to 4 waves of 5 to 6 buses at a time. So we get to about anywhere between 16 and 20 buses, but they come in waves because our busing pattern is shared with the middle school.
Yeah, and then I believe that this would hold half a dozen buses quite easily through
Frank,
here.
from my standpoint, from the transportation side, that this way that you have this set up is extremely well thought out, because it completely separates the cars and the buses, both on enter and exit of each parking lot or drop off. Where the Fairview one is, everybody enters in one spot and everybody exits out of another spot. So we're completely separated here. It's very safe for the students to get off the bus and get on buses, and it keeps the buses and the big vehicles away from the student parking lots. So I think it's been well thought out and well planned.
Yeah, on that point.
Internet connection right there, so I think I missed a little bit. But Mr. Hanson, heard you say that you felt like it was very well thought out and well planned. So in terms of the buses, right, the number of buses through that reverse J, and that 1/3 of parking, and also that 1/3 of parking that is there, right? So from a configuration standpoint, it needs to get out. We're holding off on them. Yeah. I just worry about that just congestion there. That's all.
Scott, isn't that somewhat controlled by how you release the students?
I'm the first piece to the puzzle being, yes, that area where the buses go through would be staff parking. And in terms of managing the congestion, the intent is that everybody is entering and exiting through one entry point, which is at the front of the building in terms of controlling. I think the area that becomes most challenging, I think it's a very great question. It has to do with the parent pickup, and that gives us the longest traffic pattern in terms of having cars stacked up. I think the buses, they go in waves, and the kids manage that by going in waves and there's plenty of space for them to manage getting into those waves for the buses. The one that gets more cumbersome are the family drop off and pickup, which gives us the greatest space around that parking lot. Typically staff are not leaving at the exact same time. You do have a few outliers here and there, but typically in terms of creating congestion where the bus is going through, that's where the staff would be parking, and we wouldn't see as much congestion through there as we would with the student parking and having that longer traffic pattern for the families to pick up and drop off. And really the crunch time is after school, because it's so spread out in the morning in terms of buses and students being dropped off. The crunch time is in the afternoon. And so this really does give us a good traffic flow there. But I love the question about that. That's a great point.
Great, thank you. Any more questions from the board for the applicant?
I actually do, sorry. I'm playing Evan right now. So when I was reading the information, I saw some reference to not just pedestrian walkways, but then also biking paths as well. And, I'm a very visual person, so I really do, again, appreciate that visual drawing that you provided. Again, I took a screenshot of it. So in going off of that, the walkways actually kind of look like just, they don't look like walkways per se, but just kind of like, I don't know, just size that people can, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't look like a walkway per se, it just looks like a shoulder. So where would I be able to see a specific walkway, and then B, also something about biking paths as well?
Okay, right here where we're looking, these are bikeways. This is I don't have any arrows out here, but these are 2 lanes of traffic. And then this is a bike lane going in this direction and a bike lane going in this direction. The sidewalk here coming in from Western Avenue, because there's a very tight real estate, we don't have much room, is right against the curb. But as soon as
it doesn't look like a walkway, it's a shoulder.
This is a walkway with a curb. So it's a raised sidewalk. This bike lane is here. These symbols are the bike lane symbols. So we've got one going each way, and we've got a sidewalk on this side. When we get to here, we decided to get the sidewalk away from traffic and make it a little more comfortable with a good grassed and planted green strip, crossing up here, still with a green strip, and continuing that green strip all the way up to Harris, where there is also a little bit of a green strip between the curb and the sidewalk. So that's the sidewalk is this here, not these.
Okay. And then my other question around pedestrian traffic is, so if you look at overall the plan, right? So school, if you want to, can you zoom out? So if you look at the school, it's couched by parking, right? Which makes sense, right? And then you've got all of your sports complex thereafter. So is there good walking pattern traffic for students and also those that want to go watch the sports, right? To easily navigate to each of the fields after school?
Yeah, out the front door, we go directly down through where the bus and parent drop-off walk is right here. Cross right over to a continuation of the walk.
So there is direct walking and there is direct walking through the parent and bus section?
Yeah, all this dotted area here is a raised walk that picks up parent drop-offs and bus drop-offs, so that it's protected. It separates the two, and then they go across here down to this area, which is the sports area for soccer, lacrosse, football practice, where the artificial turf fields are, and other field events down here.
Okay, can you help me get there from a walking standpoint?
Yeah, from the building, you walk out, straight down, across the drive, straight down.
Frank, when you zoom in and out, we're not following your hand. So if you can stay stationary and just move your hand without zooming We might not have a lag.
Oh, okay. Let me zoom out a little so we can see it all. Okay, so we come out of the building, head out to here. And here, if you're going down to the lower sports fields, you just go straight across, down the walk, which is again separated by a curb and a green strip, down to this lower parking lot, and then into the event areas. If you want to go to, say, the baseball field, and you come out the front door, you would come up through here, walk
With the
across.
With the buses and the teacher parking?
Right, walk up through here. You can pick up this sidewalk and go out to this walk and go up. Up
Or
in
you
this
can
area.
stay out front too, without having to interact with the buses.
Right,
Turn there, yeah.
we could come straight out here and pick up this walk and come up. And what you're not seeing is the fact that this sits up higher than this by quite a bit.
All right, so what you have is that like 2:10, 2:30ish, you've got kiddos coming out, going to various, like say softball, baseball, you've got buses exiting. So I'm looking at this one section right here. You've got kiddos trying to pass to go to potentially tennis because it's a spring sport. So you've got softball, you've got baseball, and you've got tennis. They're all three spring sports. And at that same time, you've got buses and faculty leaving, and you've got one exit right there. And students will be passing through there on the walk and the cars.
Well, I guess again, that's something, Scott, that, I mean, if everybody is going to come out of this door to go anywhere, then yes, this will be very congested right here.
No, sir, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, do you mind actually, no, hard for me. So, I can't actually, unless you want to allow me access to your screen. So if you come out of the school and you take a right, and then I have to cross past, come out of the school, keep going down the walkway, right?
Straight down to the main.
Yeah, we're going to circumvent because that's what we're trying to avoid is vehicle traffic. And I take a right. So keep walking, and it's spring, and I play baseball, softball, or tennis, and I want to, get over there, right? And so back up a little bit, back up. Right there, stop. So right there, you've got students walking, you've got possibly people going home, right? Because that all it's onto Port. You've got people going to softball, you've got people going to baseball, you've got buses, and you've got teachers coming in. So that one area looks a little troublesome to me.
Right there.
Yeah.
That's, probably most of the traffic there would either be buses coming out or staff coming out. If this is a staff parking lot. The parents and the students should all be down in this area.
I'm sorry for
Yeah, so I'm just going to back up a little bit. My concern is around students when they leave the school, and they're walkers, so they're pedestrians, so they're walking. And you've got a couple of pedestrians who will be walking, and they will be going to the baseball field, they'll be going to the softball field. They will be exiting exiting right, and then potentially walking through Harris to go home off of Court Street as well, because we have several walkers as well at Edward Little. And then in that one space as well, you've got buses and faculty parking in that one little area at around 2:10 to 2:30.
So if I understand correctly, your concern is with that cross right where the hand is, that crossing area right there? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's something we'll have to work with Scott to understand, releasing of buses and timing of sports. And, there will be signage, there will be crosswalks. There is, that one area where people will need to cross cross the road. There's, again, it's going to have to be something where it's going to have to be well signed. And with it being buses and faculty, I don't know there's as much concern as if it were a student parking lot. But we definitely will have signage there, and we can work with Scott to figure out if there's any, procedures or anything where he may want to have, staff out there, coaches out there, just to help have eyes on that area. But understand the concern. It will be well striped and well signed.
Lisa, is that crosswalk a raised crosswalk?
I'm sorry, can you say again?
Is that particular crosswalk a raised crosswalk?
No.
Not that one. No, the one that goes across, I believe.
No, this one isn't either.
That one isn't either.
No,
the turning.
We have a couple of speed tables, but they're not associated with crosswalks. We're planning a speed table here and another one here to slow traffic down before they get into this more congested area. So we're not doing them on crosswalks.
So with the exception of additional expense, can you see any reason not to have a raised crosswalk there given Mrs. LeBlanc's concerns?
I think, Frank, one of your concerns was the turning over top of that speed table. And that's why we had to move them back to slow the traffic in that area. But I'll let you address that, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I didn't keep it. Originally, we thought it was going to be here. In fact, on your drawings, it's shown there. But I've since decided that is not a good idea because when somebody's trying to turn a school bus in and out of here, it's really not comfortable to be set on edge every time you make a movement. So we decided we're really trying to slow down the traffic through this whole area, that by slowing them at this point and at this point, we're really sending the message that they've got to slow down, and then there isn't enough time to speed up again before they come to the next one. I haven't seen speed tables used on secondary, like an intersection. And I don't know if Randy can address that, but I just haven't seen speed tables used at intersections like this before.
We have one on a four-way on Lake Street. They occur in town. I guess I was wondering why not use one here.
I believe one is the raised intersection and not just the crosswalk. The entire intersection is raised.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we might look at, Frank, is you have that sidewalk that's going along the faculty parking lot. Can we move that to be between that drive and the baseball so that maybe students can get around? Because you kind of have a walk along the building, along the north edge of the building. Can we get them across the service drive into a sidewalk on the outside perimeter so they're not crossing?
Oh, up here?
Yeah. Move the one that's right across the middle there to outside there. Would that be something we could look at? I don't know how the grading would work.
Well, it's fairly steep here, but we could look at that.
It would prevent them from having to cross. There's an alternate to get them around that parking area.
Right. And I was going to mention the tennis people would not go up this way at all because they would come out, probably go along here and either go down this path or come down here and go down the path from this direction. So tennis wouldn't be heading up this way, only the baseball and softball.
Yeah.
And people heading out.
And walkers.
Walkers, right.
But if you were, I don't know, Stacy, if you follow that and you go along the edge of the building and we cross in the back near the service drive, so it's not buses and vehicles, and get the sidewalk around the outside, therefore we're not having to take them across that intersection of buses and cars, and it's less congested pathway.
I think Scott would appreciate not having to have his administration out there monitoring that. So, Scott, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, that absolutely would be an area. I see that there would be less need in the front. Typically how we would normally have bus duty. There would be less need for it for the bus pickup and more probably at that intersection and through the parking lot. And, you know, over time we'll adjust and figure out the traffic patterns of our pedestrians and figure that out. The biggest topic that we've had is the kids from student parking relocating their parking and creating congestion, even though there's not a whole lot of extra available parking spots to get closer to the fields, because they tend to like to do that. And I think once they realize that there's fewer up close parking spaces, that it will increase the amount of pedestrian traffic. The other factor that goes into the athletes getting to the fields is that many of the locker rooms are on the other side of the building. So it kind of slows them down in their afternoon time to get to the bag room or to get to the locker room in terms of timing of leaving the building at the exact same time as the buses. And 2 minutes is plenty of delay time. So even if it's staggered by 2 minutes, that will influence keeping them out of harm's way. It's not a perfect plan, but it's one that we'll certainly monitor and keep our eyes on, is particularly on that intersection. My eyes went closer to the beginning of that parking lot when we started to talk about it, but definitely seeing the traffic flow. We'll keep our eye on it, and we have bus monitors for after school time.
Great. Other questions, Evan?
Yes. So for Mr. Dutton, Mr. Crabtree's already talked about the use of the fields. He's already mentioned the use of the theater. When you did your traffic study, am I assuming that you used only, it sounds like you used the property only as a school use? Is that correct?
When we did our trip generation, we based it solely on a school. And, you know, the ancillary uses. That's how DOT would identify whether or not it needs a traffic movement permit. That doesn't mean that there won't be times when there are special events, when there are things at the auditorium. Lots of times, or most of the time, those tend to occur on off-peak hours, so that they don't conflict with the school, if you will. And many times they don't conflict with the commuter time as far as generation of traffic. So yes, we look at it as a school.
All right. So, okay, I guess, so what is the periodicity that would trigger something as a regular use? So I know where you're saying that these are sporadic events, but during an athletic season, like during a spring season, for instance, there might be games each week. There might be games every other week. It's likely there's going to be a game each week, at least once a week. So what triggers regular use for your traffic study?
Typically it's 30 times a year. And usually it's focused on those time periods of the adjacent street traffic. You know, the 7 to 9 a.m.s and the 4 to 6 p.m.s.
Yeah, I've seen several traffic studies. I've been on the board for quite a while, and I understand that we're often worried about peak, and that's where we look at. That's when we assume there'll be the most traffic, I guess. But I don't ever recall a situation in which we didn't need the traffic study because we said it wasn't during peak hours. That if it was going to generate the 100 trips, then that required a traffic study. It didn't matter if that was at 3 a.m. in the morning or, 9 a.m. in the morning. So I'm wondering why. I guess I am saying as a board member, I would like to see what the traffic impact of the additional use on the site would be. And not because I think that would create a no-go for the project. Honestly, I'm not sure it'll have a big impact. But I think it's important that as we review this, we review the intended use of the site, right? And we know that it's a school. We know that there's already a school there, which I think sort of helps alleviate a lot of concerns on our part. We already know there's a school there. We're not worried about student traffic. We know that these things already happen in this neighborhood and we're not fundamentally changing anything there. But I think it's important that we look at how moving some of the athletic fields might affect the traffic in that area. So.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Just keep in mind too that if you want to do a study now, things from a traffic standpoint are very atypical. So it might be a little tough. Everything would be theoretical at this point because you can't really go out and count and get realistic traffic patterns and volumes at this point.
Well, every traffic study is theoretical. You use comparables. So I would feel comfortable looking at comparables of other similar sized facilities. The next question I have is Fairmount. So you mentioned utilizing signs. And when you started talking about Fairmount, you talked about site distances. You gave us the delta between required and actual measured for both Western Ave and Harris, but you didn't give us what that delta was for Fairmount. So what was the difference between actual site distances there and the required site distances?
Sure. That was included in our pre-feasibility study for Fairmount, exiting out Fairmount onto Court. The required is 250 feet. Looking left, there was 200 feet. And looking right, there was 275.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You mentioned utilizing specific signage. As I understand, the section of Fairmount that we're looking at is actually a private drive. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's on school property.
Has there been any thought into utilizing a no right turn signal there? We see this used often in parking lots. Because we've seen this, I absolutely recognize that it's not an enforceable traffic pattern, but simply having the sign does make a difference. I'm reminded of, for instance, anyone who's around town might think about the no left turn signal at Ruper's on Minot Ave. It's an internal sign, and it's there to keep people from turning left, but it's not necessarily enforceable. But when you watch traffic patterns, you see that it does make a difference. So has any consideration been given to that?
Yeah, no, there could be any types of signs, such as, like I said, local traffic only, the wayfinding to encourage the use of Harris. The reason I picked those signs are because, like you said, if you put a no right sign, yeah, I'm sure it probably would have an effect. Absolutely. It's not something that's really enforceable. But yeah, no, you certainly could put something, any type of sign that you think could be appropriate or could encourage the use of Harris over Fairmount. You certainly could put there. You certainly could erect there.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking back to Mr. Blank's comment earlier about knowing our audience. And I know that a 16-year-old is not going to look at a local traffic only sign and think that they're not local traffic, because they're not going to understand what local traffic signs only means. Those are my questions for Mr. Dutton. I do have one for Mr. Crabtree, if I can, Mr. Duval.
Yes, please. Then we'll go to
so I know that I am hammering this this buffer on the eastern side of the building, and I want to make it clear that I am not discussing a vegetative buffer. When we do site plan review, we're required to assure that we don't create sort of a site nuisance as well. And by site, I don't mean S-I-T-E, I mean S-I-G-H-T. And so, Mr. Crabtree, I was wondering, since you mentioned earlier that there's quite a wide buffer at the bottom of that slope, what sort of height of the trees are we talking about? What's the difference between the height of these trees and, say, the elevation of the school itself? We're talking about a fairly tall school on top of a tall slope that's being pushed closer to residential houses. And so when I discussed the buffer, I'm specifically, it's not a vegetative buffer in terms of runoff or anything like that. I'm talking about a visual buffer.
I guess that's a good question, because as you drive down Minot Avenue now, and I've done this ever since I've been working on this school, and look up through the trees, in the winter, you can see there's a school up there. In the summer, you can't. And I know at the public meetings, one of the things that people were interested in, and I know the school department was too, is nobody that comes in from out of town knows where this school is. And they actually said, can't we put it somehow a little more visible? I think that may be what occurs when this goes here and this buffer of trees is gone. There still is a lower buffer of trees, but my guess is that you will see the building or the top of the building more clearly as you're going down Minot Avenue. Exactly how much?
It's moving much closer to the road. If that's the intent of the applicant, as a board member, I'd ask that you seek a waiver for that buffer in the rear then. As someone who's required to look at the site plan review and make sure that it meets the standards in site plan review, without that buffer, and again, not vegetative buffer, but actual blocking the site of the project, it seems to be iffy as to whether or not it meets the criteria for a site plan review. But if the applicant is adamant and has reasonable reasons why they would not want the buffer, I would ask for a waiver. I would ask that you seek a waiver. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess I'm just curious of what physically would we do. You're basically saying that we shouldn't have the school visible from Minot Avenue? I mean, is that the...
Yeah, and I understand the desire to have it visible. I work in the current building, and you're right, people have difficulty finding it all the time. I think this is an issue where we have the desires for the site running into the requirements in the ordinance. And if there's a desire for the site that is contrary to the requirements in the ordinance, I would prefer that we address that with a waiver rather than to say that we just ought to not have it and then not address it formally. I guess is what I'm saying there.
Evan, do you mind clarifying for us what the ordinance says in regards to that buffer, just so that we can make clear what the waiver is?
Oh, that's a good question. So Mr. Cousins is, I I'm going to ask Mr. Cousins to jump in. It really depends. I know that there are buffers for parking, and that's not the case here. Right. And I would say, I would look at this in the same way that we're talking about the red lights on top of the telephone pole, on top of the light poles. The board has always taken it to be that any part of the development is unsightly to people off of the development. I can't ever remember a time where we said, well, this looks good enough that we won't require this. Again, I understand that we really would like to see this high school, and I think it's great that we'd be able to see it from Minot Ave. I just think that we need to make sure we are crossing our T's and dotting our I's and making sure that when we do this, we button it up well, and that we're not leaving room for questioning or complaint at a later time, that we really make sure we've done it properly.
Thank you. Mr. Bergeron? You're muted.
I also had a question for Mr. Dutton about the with Forest Ave being turned into a cul-de-sac and Fairmount being discouraged with signage for traffic. I don't know how often there is cars that leave those two roads to get onto Court Street, generally both taking right turns because it's the easiest way to get out. With one of them being discouraged and one of them being closed, I feel like the traffic that would be leaving both those streets will be pushed onto Harris. And as someone who tries to take a left out of Granite Street onto Court Street in the morning, sometimes the traffic coming out of Harris can stop traffic going up and down the hill in both directions. And I wonder, I didn't know if you knew how much traffic generally leaves using Fairmount and Forest or enters Fairmount and Forest, and how much that would change when one's being discouraged and one's being closed off.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. I held my space bar down, but I guess it didn't work. The pre-feasibility study that we did didn't include turning movement counts. So we're not sure what the volumes are and how much traffic would be redistributed to Harris, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, I would expect that both those streets would, transfer over to Harris, or perhaps find a different way out, depending on lots of times traffic, from schools especially, they kind of seek an equilibrium. If they know that one way is going to take them a lot longer, they'll go over to the shortest way, and so it kind of equals out eventually. But you're absolutely right. That traffic will go over to Harris. How much, I do not know.
Thank you.
Further questions for the applicant? Great, thank you. Hearing none, I would thank the applicant. And we can now move on to the public comment portion of the meeting. Do I have a motion? You're muted.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay. You're muted, Megan.
Of course. Mr. Bergeron.
Yes.
Mr. Sear.
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan.
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Yes.
Mr. Staples,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. Okay, any members of the public wish to make comments to the board about this project?
We have 5 here currently.
Okay. Those here that wish to comment, just if you can use the raise your hand function, we'll call on you in order. So seeing no raised hands, I'll be looking for a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Mr. Bergeron,
Yes.
Mr. Sear,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Staples,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. Okay. At this point, I think the board has some discussion to do. Anybody ready to open that? I just, in terms to summarize the things that I heard about, we talked a lot about traffic just now with the applicant, and we talked about screening on the east side. And then prior to hearing from the applicant, we talked about the views of the buildings, whether or not we want to proceed with those, obstruction lights, traffic, stormwater, and a couple of waivers.
And pedestrian traffic, is that part of the traffic?
I think that's part of the traffic, yeah. Yep.
Mr. Duval, so the waiver that Mr. Sear was referencing about the buffer waiver, I know they haven't asked for that, but would that be under our ability to grant that since they haven't asked for it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm seeing Mr. Sear.
Yep.
I think that might be a good idea. I do think that covers the project, and I personally would enjoy being able to see the school driving on Minot Avenue. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now, but.
Well, I mean, I very much appreciate Mr. Sear's suggestion to identify where we are just not choosing not to apply a rule by creating a waiver. So thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Sear. Any comments on that? We might as well start there.
No, I actually, Mr. Cousins hit on something earlier. If we don't want to go with a waiver, one of the things that we need to determine under section 60-1277 is that the development has made provisions for protection of adjacent areas against detrimental or offensive uses on the site by provision of adequate surface water drainage, buffers against artificial and reflected light, sight, sound, so on and so forth. So that also, there's another piece in the site plan review that touches on this concept of site, which is why we always see buffers, these visual buffers when we do these site plans, because it's in there a couple places. But again, that also it uses, instead of objectionable, as Mr. Cousins just cited, it uses detrimental. And since I'm the one that brought up this issue, I would be more than happy to suggest that in our board findings that we find that the site itself does not create an objectionable visual offense to neighbors, and that if we include that in the findings, it would do the same thing as a waiver. In fact, it might be, I think, preferable as I process it out loud. And I think that would be a way to do it as well. And I don't know, Mr. Cousins, what your take is on that, but as I process, I think that might be the preferable way to handle that, is just to place that in the findings. Yep.
It sounds as if it makes more sense as well, seeing as they become subjective parts of the ordinance within site plan, whereas in subdivision they're actually written in. So
yeah, so I would ask that just be included in findings, and that's something the staff writes up after. And as long as the board is amicable to that, I don't think that needs to be part of the motion. If we're discussing it right now, we're saying it's going to be based on the findings during the meeting, and this discussion represents findings. So,
yep, I agree. Other discussion, other items.
Eric, I have a question for staff, and it might be something that the applicant or agent for the applicant would need to answer. What is the timeline for this project?
As far as I know, they were planning to start this coming spring and wrap up by the spring, summer of 2023.
Okay.
So that would mean the current high school would be demolished in spring of 2023 before the new high school is occupied that fall.
Yeah, that matches what's in the report.
Yeah, I just wanted that out loud because as we discussed, we're going to get to a point in this discussion where we either feel comfortable delegating review to staff or we don't. And so when we make that decision, it's always nice to know what the timeline for the project is and how our decision will impact that. So,
yep. Okay. So I'm happy to step through some of the other issues. Just working backward, I think we had some questions about traffic. Any discussion, further discussion on these points?
Well, one thing that's not part of the site plan but was discussed by the applicant is the idea that one solution that would have the largest impact on traffic in and out of the site was to require that large vehicles, i.e. buses, enter and exit on Western Ave.
Yep.
And we can choose to say that we want that to happen, or we can even make it a condition if we really feel strongly about it. But I thought that was a reasonable solution to a problem that we really can't fix. They're fixed roads, they're already there. We can't change those curb cuts. So.
Yep. Any thoughts on that or other thoughts on traffic?
I do think that when you go from 4 different access points down to pretty much 3, because people can still, if they want to take Fairmount into, because that's not a site concern, into Every Little. But when you're going from 4 down to 2 for people to leave, it's definitely going to increase the traffic, and most likely probably on Harris. I can tell you that just lived experience that can affect traffic going down Granite Street, going down Jocelyn Street, and almost to Holly. That's a concern of mine. That's all.
It's a concern of mine too.
I think that's a concern that we could possibly raise with the city council and ask them to create a right turn out of Harris onto Court. You alleviate sort of the left-hand traffic. If you could only take a right, people that are looking to take a left might be more apt to go out Western Ave and take a left off of Western.
It's more when people are coming up Court Street and looking to take a left onto Harris, and there's downhill traffic taking a right onto Harris for the right of way, they end up stopped, and it blocks at least Granite and often all the way to Holly Street. And there's also morning traffic in and out of the corner store there, so it really adds up to quite a cluster, especially in the mornings. I think when the school releases, it might be a different story, which is actually when it's probably more of a problem, since there's only 2 places that, one place buses will leave and 2 places that cars will leave. But just in the morning, even when people are taking all different times, because morning traffic's just generally worse than it is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So morning traffic combined with only really having 2 major and 1 major access point for the buses, but 2 major access points is going to slow traffic up in the whole area.
I'd be interested to see how the changing of the entrance makes a difference. This is an incredibly complicated site, and I will say I know there are concerns about the internal traffic flow, but given the number of spots and sort of what they've been able to accomplish, this is actually one of the much better plans I've seen come in front of me, actually. And I'll highlight one of the things I like about it is that that parent drop off is much more convenient to the Western Ave entrance. And so I wonder, Mr. Bergeron, of course, we have no way of knowing, but I wonder if that will affect whether or not those people come up Harris, or if they'll choose to.
I don't know I don't know what the percentage of parent versus student traffic is. It's just, I think it's more the distance between, and it's not something that will be fixed by this plan either, but the distance between Harris and across the street, Granite, is 2-3 car lengths. So if all of a sudden one of those cars is trying to take a left into Harris and there's oncoming right traffic onto Harris, maybe that could be alleviated by more people taking a right onto Western if that is kind of declared the entrance or something to that line. But just if there's just 1 or 2 cars waiting, then it stops up traffic in both directions. Though actually, and I can say an addition that's recently been added to Court Street, that blinking light, the pedestrian light to Harris from across Court Street, that's a savior for I can tell you, as someone who takes a left out of Granite, it's a savior for us because that stops the traffic coming down the hill, allows people to take a left into Harris, and I can squeeze out getting left down the Court Street. Again, it's just a lived experience bit.
And Mr. Sayre, I'll just add to that. So you're talking about 15 to 18-year-olds, and at that juncture in life, either kiddos are walking, they're taking the bus, or they're driving, or they're having their friends drive them to school. So from a parent pickup drop-off standpoint, it's probably percentage-wise smaller compared to all the other items I just ticked off. So when I was looking at that plan, I was like, wow, I would love to see the bus drop-off as large as the parent pickup drop-off. Because
I see.
A, buses are larger and longer. 2, that is where the vast majority of people are coming in. They're either walking, driving, or having friends drive them. And you've got this small little bus loop, and you've got a parent pick up and drop off. And when you're 17, you're not getting dropped off by your parents. That's cool.
So is that you might not. I know a lot of board members are fairly new to this, but if you have a serious concern, like you can introduce.
This is my second meeting. I have no idea. I come from the corporate world, but I just take over.
No, that's what I'm saying.
I'm like
decisions. I happen to think that this was probably one of the better plans that came before me. But if you have concerns, I guess what I'm saying is, as a senior member, I want to let you know that you have the power right now to introduce changes, and then we would take it up, and it might go through or might not. So don't feel like you can't. If you have a serious concern on the site itself.
From a traffic pattern,
truthfully, I don't know that there's a better solution, or there is a solution. I would just raise a concern as the traffic is built up. I don't know that, like I said, the flashing light in the crosswalk has made a difference. I don't know that putting that anywhere else along Court Street would make any difference to any. And I don't know how it would be done traffic-wise, but if you were to make Western, so for bus traffic, Western Ave would be the entrance and exit for the buses, because they don't have the sight lines on Harris, or at least going left on Harris. But if it could be designated as kind of the entrance to the high school and Harris, I understand I could propose something, but I don't know exactly what I would be able to propose to solve the problem, because it is, like you said, it's a great. The rest of the plan is great. I just don't know. I don't think that keeping Forest as a connector would really fix it that much, because it really isn't that much traffic getting closed off. But I wonder if maybe discouraging I don't know how much traffic goes down Fairmount, because like you said, it wasn't recorded in the study, but if maybe, I don't know why we would need to discourage the traffic going down Fairmount, because if people were taking a right onto Court Street and they were in a small car, the bus is already being instructed to go down Western. So if they're in a car and then they're taking a right out of, if you say right turn, maybe instead of local traffic, it says right turn on the Court only or something like that, just to alleviate some of the traffic going down Harris back on the Court.
I would like a review of the bus and the parent pickoff. I'm not understanding that configuration and how they came up with that it just doesn't make sense to me. But
looking at the pickup drop-off points, it might be worth looking at whether they should switch the bus drop-off and the parent pickup access points. And the reason I say that is because that crosswalk that goes over onto the track is problematic when you're talking the exit point there. But if that's route so that the bus came out right before the crosswalk, the buses would be making a left-hand turn there, and they wouldn't be going over that crosswalk. And I think the parents, maybe the parents would be more likely to use Harris Street. That might free up that crosswalk a little. Of course.
The concern that I had in that area where you have all of these buses coming through with also a parking lot, also walkers heading out towards Court, also walkers heading towards softball and the baseball field. You've got a lot percentage-wise. I would love to know what you've got traveling right versus with just everything traveling right. Yeah. So.
Well, what we'll see here is, regardless of the best intentions of the architect, you're going to start seeing desire lines from the students who are trying to get to a certain field. And they're going to go whatever's the quickest way and whatever the best exit route is. And maybe it's exactly what we have here, but we'll see,
So, okay, I'm going to totally stop talking, but after I say this. So, Mr. Staples, you totally nailed that. So, desire lines, I like that, because when I'm looking at this plan and just understanding kiddos, and because I have one myself, and what you're going to see is that traffic pattern. And if you do not plan in good walking paths to all of these complexes, they will create them themselves. And it won't be pretty, it will be unsightly, and it will be like a mar to the land, right? So they will create them through grass, they will create them on their own way. So unless you create them themselves and understand, 15 to 19-year-old behavior, they will create it themselves. So you nailed it.
You've got a couple of tricky spots here too, so we'll see.
Eric, can I ask a question? I don't have there are so many, actually here, I have got it here. The vegetative plan is there. Vegetation, okay, yeah. So there are, see, these site plans are so big. Yeah, so if we are looking at the sight line for someone going to the baseball field, I know that there's a slope. Well, you see that Mr. Crabtree seemed adamant that students wouldn't go there, but I can tell you, in a building where there's already a hill, they just walk up and down the hill. So when I think about the sight line, or where pedestrians are going to go, I see them coming out of the building, cutting across the front, going directly across the staff parking, and then basically just walking up that hill. If you follow the sidewalk along the front of the school as you progress towards the staff, what is proposed, essentially to be the staff parking, you'll see that the planting plans have 2 trees on islands, and if you sort of look at this visually, those islands are directly in line with the sidewalk outside of the school. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be better to remove those trees, create a striped crosswalk from the sidewalk in between each of the islands to cross the parking lot. And the reason I say that is if we put in, it is the straightest line, and if we put something in that looks like it's the straightest line path, the students will use it. And if we don't put something in, they'll go the straightest line. But if we know that they're going to follow that straight line, I think it would be a good idea to sort of stripe it as such and remove some of the vegetation, so that way they're not walking around the islands and through cars or into the vehicular path. They're staying to the right of that path or to the east of that vehicular right of way, at least through the parking lot.
And looking at the same, go ahead, Eric. And to take that a step further, looking at these, the planting plans, maybe it's just not shown on this map, but I'm not sure where the point of access is to the baseball field. Are we just assuming that people will just walk up a hill wherever they want, or is there a place that they're going to try and direct that foot traffic? Well, sure, but I mean, how do you actually get onto the field? You've got a hill there. It looks like it's surrounded by.
You have to actually go through a parking lot. So again, that was the other thing I highlighted is you have to actually walk through a parking lot where there's only one entrance in and out of that one parking lot in order. So you've got students walking, and in theory, if they follow the path of not least resistance, because that's what they're going to follow, but they follow actually like what we tell them to do, they're going to all be walking on the sidewalk. And then also too, you've got that one parking spot for softball and baseball and a pedestrian exit entrance as well. So you've got walkers and 2 sports, hopefully simultaneously going together, right? Because that would be great if we had 2 home games, all in one entrance.
And so, Mr. Little, to answer your question, here's the path that I was talking about, going right across these islands, right? So these islands have vegetation on them in the plan, but we take that off, put striping, so that this is a clear, essentially just a clear walkway, basically a flat extension of the sidewalk. They can cross here where they're unlikely to encounter traffic because they're to the right of the most efficient traffic movement. But to answer your question, there's a sidewalk that comes all the way up here and then comes down the field with dugout entrances here and here. And I think students are just going to walk across here up the slope and hit their dugout entrance. That's I don't see a student tacking on an extra 1,500 feet to go to practice.
Yeah, it might be neat to put some stairs or something in there. Just Yep. And because you're going to have a fence along right field.
Yeah.
And chances are the dugout's going to have a fence. And there's going to be a backstop, so there'll be a small point of entrance there.
Right, and those are the next to the dugouts on the plan anyway are the only pedestrian points of entrance to the field. And it looks like there is maybe a maintenance gate out in.
Oh yeah, sure.
Right field. It looks like right field and left field. Yeah.
We'll need those for field hockey because that'll be a field hockey field too. Or no, the outfield is used for something.
Yeah, field hockey.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
That's a fall sport though, but yeah.
Yeah, they don't overlap.
Sure, but I mean, people will be going there for that.
Right. Yeah.
So, we've talked about traffic. We've talked some now about foot traffic. Are there any recommendations or conditions or ideas that people would like to propose that we consider before we move on to other topics?
Yeah, I would like us to amend the site plan and the planting plan to remove the two trees that I was just discussing and amend the site plan to put in striping across from the sidewalk to the island and then in between each of the islands.
Yep. So we essentially want to create a walkway running parallel with the front of the building through the staff parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And Megan, do you understand? Did you catch all that?
I think so. All right, let's see. I just want to make sure I have the right islands that you're talking about.
Hold it up a little closer.
Yeah, Eric's got it.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
All right, we'll confer.
So to do that and then to remove the tree on those islands.
Okay, are there other things related to traffic and or foot pedestrian circulation that people want to discuss or propose?
Yeah, I'd like to propose that there be signage at the entrance to Fairmount. And I'm not sure what that signage is. I'll leave that up to someone else, but it's something that multiple people on the board have discussed. And so I think it seems like enough of us want that to be part of the site plan, some signage there. So we should go ahead and define what that signage should be.
So I actually have a question about that. Seeing as that section of Fairmount is private road, is it actually, it may not be desirable, but is it possible to make it one-way in?
Yeah, right. It's the driveway. They can totally make it whatever they want.
Right. So if it's something that that actually wants to be used to control traffic, if you make it one way in, then students have a lot less choice about what they want to do. Like, that's a harder one to ignore, because I agree, local traffic only is like, oh, that's the shortcut.
I think I just want to run that by the fire department just to make sure that they're all set with that from a circulation perspective.
Right.
My only hesitation with that is that depending on, so making it a one-way, the fire department might have specific standards that require, and it doesn't seem like it would be a lot, but if you start changing a curb cut and narrowing roads and things, it can be a substantial cost. So I guess I would want to know if that would cause the project to incur a substantial cost.
Yep. So let me flip this on its head then. Who would you have make the decisions about handling that, the signage and or flow through that road? You said you wanted some sort of signage, but you would leave it up to someone else.
Oh, well, I've just been talking a lot, so I think
Not as much as me.
I thought you wanted another board.
Someone else on the board.
If it was another
someone else
board.
on the board, yeah, and I don't mean, no, not, I don't think we should delegate that to staff. I think the board should decide what kind of sign we think would be most effective there. Yes.
My favorite option that was presented by Coral Palmer was to put a sign up saying Court Street this way. I think that's really what we're looking at here, is that the people that are not used to coming in and out of Edward Little just need a little guidance.
I would also add exit to Court Street.
Sure.
The word exit tells me how to get out.
Yep.
I think that sounds reasonable.
Okay.
Any number of different ways to do it,
Yeah. I guess in my head, I'm thinking, okay, so the students that are already there are going to teach every subsequent student that you just bang down.
But as soon as they,
how do we do that?
yeah, as soon as they figure out no right turn means take a right turn as the shortcut,
Right.
then everybody knows.
Right, but
yeah, but also, if they're taking a right, if you're taking a right down Fairmount to get on Court, you're going to get on pretty easily. That's not going to stop traffic in any direction. If you're trying to get down Fairmount, take a left. That's your own fault. My high schooler might do that. They'll learn pretty quickly. It's not a quick move.
Yep.
Taking a right on the Court, it's with the flow of traffic. The V coming from Fairmount onto Court is a right hand turn out of Fairmount's not going to slow down any traffic besides that coming out of Fairmount. I don't think.
Okay. Any other conditions related to traffic that people want to put out?
I would go back to what I said, and during the staff report, that, if there's anything that maybe the city council can do for us for sidewalk improvements on Fairmount, Harris, that'd be wonderful. It would be really nice to have some sort of a crosswalk across Western, but those are city council things. I would think they aren't really necessarily part of this.
Okay. What about buses? Do we want to say anything about buses?
I think it's a good idea to restrict buses in and to be on Western only. I don't think they need to be on Fairmount for any reason. And in Harris, I don't see a real good reason for them to be on that one either.
If you don't mind, you may want to include tractor trailer trucks in that as well. Not sure how many they're anticipating coming there, but
I was going to say, we might want to say large vehicles.
Yeah.
Because it seems that encompasses.
Yep.
Or
I don't
even
feel comfortable with the busing pattern.
Traffic.
I don't feel comfortable with the busing pattern that has been proposed. So I am not sure what the next steps are in terms of reviewing. I think Mr. Staples had a great idea about potentially looking at the parent pickup drop-off space. So I'm not sure what next steps would be on that.
So I mean, to talk about that one, I see there are probably more options than this, but thinking off the top of my head, I really see two possibilities there. One is that the board could choose to be directive and re-engineer that on the spot, or could also make a suggestion that they do a circulation analysis and consider changing what they've already designed.
I like your second idea.
No, I agree. I would caution against putting specific conditions as to say like which side the buses should drop off and where should drop off. With the understanding that when we approve these site plans and we put conditions on them, that site plan and those conditions are forever conditions, and it's a forever site plan, and the applicant is beholden unto what's on the site plan as well as the conditions, unless we've allowed for some sort of staff oversight. And there can be minor changes, and that can go to staff oversight, but it's in our best interest not to do some things that would require them to say, come back to us if they find that, you know, dropping off students on this side versus that side was safer or less safe.
I agree.
One item that I just put in my notes was to perhaps have them provide an overview of the times that there's games, the times that school gets out, the school buses, generally what time staff leaves, and in relation to the issues that we discussed tonight, and provide all that information to the planning board to deliberate, if that's the direction the planning board wants to head in, rather than trying to re-engineer the plan on the spot.
It's fair.
I think another thing to keep in mind is that, you know, when this was presented to us, it was said that at least the parking was still up in the air as far as how they were going to use it. So perhaps some of the other traffic in and out, you know, is up for debate as well. So maybe some further analysis could change things for them.
So, what you suggest, the act of actually getting more information suggests one path for the board for tonight, whereas creating a condition, I think, creates another path for the board. The former being that we don't actually make a motion tonight regarding to this, we table it, and the latter being potentially we do move with a motion. Is that right?
Yeah, I think those are the two options.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Before we move on to some of the other topics, are we done with pedestrian flow and traffic flow on the site? Okay, great. Anybody have a topic of importance to them that they would like to move to now?
I think we're going to need to cover stormwater runoff at some point. Maybe it'd be good to talk about that.
Yep, I agree.
I think my initial thoughts are, you know, having read the document just today, I tend to agree that most of the things that I see in that document don't seem to be huge changes as far as the site plan to me, from my perspective. So I think where I would like to see this go is for staff to review, you know, based on changes from the applicant.
Other thoughts on stormwater?
No, I would tend to agree. It was substantive in its whole, but each individual part didn't create a substantive change to the plan itself if implemented. And it sounds like Mr. Crabtree is quite adamant that some of it may not need to be implemented. So I'm with Mr. Staples here, and I think that staff is probably more qualified to really handle it on that end, and that the condition just include that if it creates a substantive change, that it would come back to the planning board at that point, but not necessarily for any other reason.
Yeah.
Okay. Other thoughts, concerns? All right. How are we feeling about the loading zone?
I think that we should handle that in the same way we discussed handling the screening, the buffer screening. That our finding is that they do meet the requirement for the square footage of spaces required, even though that it's not planned to be striped.
So you would. Got it. So you wouldn't grant a waiver there. You would actually state that it's met, that the standard is met, the requirement is met, but for
I would include it in our list of we have our findings that all these standards are met, right? That this standard is met, and sometimes when we say that there's an explanation as to why, and the explanation would be that the square footage required in the ordinance is present. It is, I'm not, and I'm not sure that the ordinance even necessarily says it has to be striped per se. It just says you need to have some spots, and I guess if you're not painting the spots, maybe they don't count. But
I would think they would probably have a sign or something, right? No parking at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a little tripped up by the ordinance wording myself. I think it says spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
What is it? That's not lines.
Right.
Okay, how are people feeling about the obstruction lights?
That's the red light, the airport. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
I probably should have asked staff this earlier. How is that set a precedent? Wouldn't it only set a precedent for the next tennis courts being built or baseball? How does putting lights on top of those poles set precedent going forward? But so it would only affect light posts that would be newly constructed. It wouldn't require all parking lots to have that kind of capacity with those kind of poles to have it. It would just say going forward. Okay.
Just gonna chime in here real quick. Who recommended that red light for the life flight? Okay, and so did the airport manager review the specs? Because what I heard tonight was the highest point was, I think, the baseball field, right? And it wasn't the tennis courts. So I think if his concern is the highest point with lights, then I think there needs to be a review of the highest point of the light. So is it the tennis court or is it the baseball field? Was should you have a volume of people and they have the light flight within the school, he just wants to be concerned of where the highest, that's what I gathered from it. Why are you laughing, Riley? Okay, well.
I would think that having a place that lifelike could land at the high school with having that many athletic fields wouldn't be a bad thing. I just didn't know that it would be setting precedent for every parking lot going forward. It seems like it would be not a bad idea to have flight be able to get to the baseball, football, whatever fields.
Well, it doesn't preclude their ability to do so. They could still do it without the red lights, right? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sensing that the board does not feel strongly about this issue. Okay. That feels like all the issues that I took notes on. Does there anyone else have any outstanding thing they would like to discuss about this project? So if not, and I hear nothing from any of you, I think to continue, we would need a motion.
I move to close the discussion. Now that I'm off mute.
So I'm thinking about this. So we want staff to review internal traffic circulation patterns.
Do we want staff to do that, or do we want to have them do it?
Didn't he say traffic would be hard to estimate since there's not going to be any school traffic for the foreseeable future? Or, it's going to be hard to get an accurate traffic study with the COVID situation.
Look, Riley, that was really nice of him to say that, but they don't go out and measure like Kmart like tomorrow to figure out our numbers. They have tables that are going to be like uses that are from similar areas around the country. So I was personally a little miffed when he told me they couldn't do it because they can't go measure it right now, because I know that when they do a comparative traffic study and they do traffic counts, yes, they can do real-time traffic counts, but when they look at future uses, obviously they can never measure future use traffic counts, but they do have manuals and tables that they use, so that if we were looking at a hockey arena, he would have been able to tell us the probable number of trips in and out, or if we had been looking at a coffee shop, he would have been able to do that as well based on the square footage. So they can absolutely do that here because he's got comparable tables. And I just sort of got the opinion that he didn't feel like doing it. That's my personal opinion.
I was under the impression that he didn't do a car count in the first one because he said the section of the time that he looked at was still during regular traffic school stuff, but he said he still didn't do the turn counts out of each street. So I didn't know if that was something that would be in those tables, or if I didn't know if the turn count on each of those streets would be more specific than a general high school table.
Yeah, no, that he can't do. He can't necessarily go out and measure current turn counts. You're right.
But
what were we looking at specifically for traffic, I guess?
Well, so traffic, I don't think we had anything. My understanding was, well, at least my understanding the circulation issue is related to reassessing where the bus drop-off is and where the parent drop-off is. Am I wrong on that?
That's right.
Are we going to make that as a friendly suggestion, or do you want to make that a condition? And again, if you make something a condition, it's binding. It's there.
I wouldn't make it a condition. I would let the experts, and by expert I mean Mr. Hunter and Mr. Anir, make those choices about where they think the traffic is going to go and where they think the traffic is best to, I trust them to make those decisions.
Well, the condition could be that they actually review it and then present something to staff, right?
So condition being that the applicant review internal traffic patterns with a report to be reviewed by staff.
I mean, that if we were going to create a condition, then I would use some language along those lines. I wouldn't be directive to us to a solution, because I don't think we have, as Mr. Staples has suggested, the expertise to come up with a solution. If we as a board actually want to see an analysis that they do, then I think the only way to do that would be to table our discussions now and ask for something for next meeting or for a future meeting. So I leave that to the people who were concerned about the issue. So I'm looking for an opinion from the board. If I don't see one, I think then we proceed without a condition.
I wouldn't put a condition on it. Maybe, I don't know, bring it up as a suggestion. I'm not sure exactly what the right way to go is.
Well, if we want it to be a suggestion, we've essentially already done it. Staff will talk to the applicant, say the planning board suggests you do this. And then that's where that's at.
Okay. And I'm good.
So no internal traffic analysis?
I just heard no.
All right, I'm gonna make one motion. I propose that the planning board grant a waiver to the site plan presented by the City of Auburn School Department proposing construction of the new Edward Little High School building and associated parking, drives, track, and field facility, tennis courts, and new athletic fields on the existing site located at 77 Harris Street, parcel ID number 240-322 in the urban residential zoning district, to include lifting of the restriction of the 35-foot maximum building height, and that we grant the waiver for the requirement of having only one principal building per lot.
Okay, we have a motion. The motion for 2 waivers, right?
Yep.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Mr. Sear?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
So I'm just gonna ask this quick question. Does this close the table on the traffic patterns and all of that we had questions on? Thank you. Okay, yes.
Mr. Staples?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval?
Yes. Now, I've had a suggestion to staff that we make one more call for public comment. If the board agrees, I would need a motion to do that.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I second that.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, we have to vote.
All right, I need my list because for whatever reason, I can't memorize everyone in alphabetical order. Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Mr. Sear?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Staples?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval?
Yes. Okay, at this time, there are any members of the public that would like to comment on this project, please use the hand raise function in Zoom, which if you pop out the participants, click on the participants down below, and a panel will pop out to the right, and you can choose to raise your hand. There should be a blue button that suggests you can raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, I would look for a motion to close public comment again.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Mr. Sear?
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan?
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Mr. Staples?
Yes.
And Chairman Duval?
Yes. All right, thank you all. So we've had a motion to grant 2 waivers. I heard from the board, someone indicated that they might have more to say about traffic. Is that correct, Ms. LeBlanc?
That is correct.
Okay. What would you like to say?
Just that I need more information on it. So how about can we table this and then we can reconnect?
So that is a motion that we can entertain. Tabling this,
Okay.
I just clarify with the rest of the board. I think tabling this and with staff means that we table the application until a date, either certain or uncertain, till a future date.
All right, so what I'm going to say is this is only my second meeting and I'm not really sure what the protocols are. So I don't feel comfortable moving forward with the traffic patterns within that school per se. So I guess I would lean on my fellow participants to help me in terms of what our next steps, so that we can to put that to bed and understand what they are, move forward. Okay. I prefer to table till August 11th, but I guess I'll defer to see what others feel.
Well, I think I would echo what Mr. Sear said earlier. If you wish to make a motion on that, we can do that and then discuss it.
Okay, I'll make a motion to defer to August 11th.
Do I have a second?
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah, hearing no second, I guess we just continue discussion.
No, I'm fine.
So Mr. Cousins, I think was right. Well, we really have sort of three options. I think one is to table the discussion. And we would do that if we feel that we need to be the adjudicatory entity in deciding how to fix the problem that we perceive there to be. The second option is that we create a specific condition that fixes a problem that we see in a site plan. And the third option is to create a condition that delegates authority to staff to address an issue that we've seen. Of course, the first two options, we are the primary adjudicatory authority, either by creation of the condition or by requiring the applicant to come back to us for future discussion. And in the third option, we delegate our adjudicatory authority to staff. And it basically comes down to the following question. Do we as a board feel that we understand the issue and are the correct folks to make the decision on it? Or do we feel that staff understands it, is the sort of the primary on understanding it, and that we feel they should make the decision on it? So that's sort of what that comes down to. And one is obviously not a better option than the other. It's dependent on how the board feels on a specific topic, right? So I've seen cases on the board where we table things because we say, no, we don't want to delegate to staff. And I've seen times where we've delegated, we've approved site plans without a stormwater, without even a stormwater study done, because in looking at that particular site, it was very straightforward, and we felt that staff was more than adequate to be able to do it. And so it just really depends on how the board feels about a specific topic.
Do we have the ability to delegate the decision to the Complete Streets Committee?
No, because they have no adjudicatory authority in statute or ordinance. The reason we can delegate to staff is because statute and ordinance provides the authority for us to be able to do so, but it's too specific. We can specifically to staff, and we can't. I mean, it wouldn't make sense for us to delegate everything. I guess at a certain level you almost could, but the board, it's sort of spelled out who we're allowed to say can go have that authority.
thank you and Mr. Sear for outlining those paths forward. Unless there's more discussion, I think if we are going to move forward, we need a motion to do so.
So before I make my motion, I'll say that I make this motion and I do so sort of having some experience and not, I'm discounting anyone, but that I have in the past found myself woefully inadequate in solving complex traffic problems as compared to our city engineers and police department. They're much they're much better at it than I am. So I make a motion to approve the site plan and special exception by the City of Auburn School Department to construct a new Edward Little High School building and associated parking, drives, track and field facility, tennis courts, and new athletic fields on the existing site located at 77 Harris Street, parcel ID number 240-322 in the urban residential zoning districts with the following conditions. One, that a street light be added in the proposed cul-de-sac at Forest Avenue. Two, driveway drainage issues concerning the property owner at the corner of Harris Fairmount shall be addressed. Three, that the staff, that the applicant present an analysis of the revised stormwater plan to staff for their review and approval. So I'm removing the current three and replacing it with a new one. Four, that a follow-up traffic analysis shall be provided looking specifically at the increase in traffic using the Harris-Auburn Heights access. Any potential issues with site distance at all entrances shall also be included in the report with recommended solutions to be reviewed by staff. Five, to remove 5 from the staff report and to replace it with the condition that large vehicular traffic access be limited to the Western Ave entrance to the site. 6, that an addressing plan shall be provided to the addressing officer for the location of the new high school. And 7, that the engineering department shall sign off on the stormwater review before building permits are issued. Ms. LeBlanc, would you like something with internal traffic?
I'm good, thank you.
I'd be happy to add something.
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Based on the findings presented in the discussion amongst the board tonight.
So that's your motion?
Yes.
With those 7 conditions. Okay, do I have a second?
Yeah, second.
Okay, is there any discussion?
I'm going to throw this out there because there are some members that are fairly new, may not be aware of the process. As a member, as a planning board member, you are allowed to ask anyone who made a motion to make a friendly amendment. You present a friendly amendment to their motion and they can choose to either accept or reject it. And since it has been seconded at this point, the person who seconded it would either accept or reject it. If they reject it, someone else could create a second on that amendment. It's a friendly amendment process. So if you feel that the motion in front of you is somehow inadequate or missing something or has overstepped its bounds, this is your opportunity to seek a friendly amendment to the motion.
So, Mr. Sear, is your number 3 about stormwater drain off? I didn't write that one down. Your third condition.
Right. So number 7 was that the engineering department should sign off on the stormwater review before the building permits are presented. But I changed number 3 to be specific to our concerns with the current, with Woodard and Curran, so that the applicant would present their amended stormwater review to planning staff for their review and approval. I guess it creates a redundancy, but it speaks more specifically to the concern we had than number 7 does.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so I'd like to make a friendly amendment to review the internal traffic pattern.
I'm going to help you out here. So you want the applicant to conduct an internal traffic review to be presented to whom?
Planning board. Sorry, Evan, this is
No. I'm thinking about how that works. We can do that. We can say that we want them to come back to us at a future time.
I have training coming up. I just haven't had it yet.
No, I'm thinking about how that works. We have had, because I'm thinking, okay, so we have had conditions that would require, like, everything's fine, except you do have to come back to the planning board for this one thing. I'm trying to, I didn't mean.
No, I know.
I was thinking back, like, how have we done that in the past? So if you wanted to come back to the planning board, you could say that. If you wanted to go to staff, you could say that. So you want it to have to come back to the planning board. Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh. You have a friendly amendment. Mr. Sear?
Yeah. What?
Do you accept the friendly amendment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm thinking. I was like, oh, what happened? Yeah. I apologize, Stacy. I would absolutely send it to staff, but I don't think if it comes back to the planning board, I would be any more qualified to act on it than the staff would. But I would be more than happy to entertain a friendly amendment that would send an analysis to staff.
Okay.
So are you making that friendly amendment?
Yes.
Then I will accept that friendly amendment.
Excellent.
Okay, this was seconded by, was it Mr. Staples?
Yeah, I'll accept that too.
Okay. Any other discussion, friendly amendments? I have one. I would like a condition that signage be placed at the Fairmount, at the corner of Fairmount and Harris that indicates that continuing on Harris, put a sign there that says exit to Court Street.
I'll accept that.
So will
I'm just trying to weigh the importance of the word exit.
Perhaps it could say exit to Court Street and downtown.
Yeah. Yeah, that works for me.
Is that your, I'll accept that as a friendly motion, friendly amendment, yeah.
Yeah, I like that one too.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'd like to vote.
Mr. Bergeron,
Yes.
Mr. Sear,
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan, Ms. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mr. Staples,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. All right, that concludes this particular item, number 3 on our agenda. Per rules of the planning board, it is after 9, it is 9:23 p.m. and we would require a motion to continue. And if not, then I think we need a motion to adjourn.
I would ask staff a question under miscellaneous. how important does staff feel those discussions are, that we have those discussions now, and that as to whether or not that information could be presented in an email?
Can certainly be presented in an email. I defer to the chair on miscellaneous A, just because I don't know the priority list, I guess, of that one, whether or not.
What is miscellaneous A? I'm working off the old agenda.
Sorry, it's the overlapping zoning districts, preparing for August and September. This was in relation to the backlots discussion.
I don't think that's high enough priority.
Okay.
I don't think that's a high priority at the moment.
All right, and I can send the comp plan update info. It's just pretty simple, so I can send that in an email.
Okay, seeing that's the case, I make a motion that and actually, Steph, is anyone still in the public watching right now?
Yes, looks like 3 people.
Well, there are 3 people, so I'll make the following motion, I guess. I make a motion that we take up item 4, public comment, on the agenda, and immediately after which entertain a motion for adjournment.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I second that.
Mr. Bergeron,
Yes.
Mr. Sear,
Yes.
Mr. Finnegan,
Yes.
Ms. LeBlanc, Mr. Staples,
Yes.
and Chairman Duval.
Yes. At this time, we'd like to open or invite members of the public to use the Zoom raise your hand feature. You will be called upon in the order in which you raise your hand if you would like to address the board. Seeing no hands raised, I would entertain a motion to close public comment.
Oh, we didn't have to open it, so you get to close it. You're the chair on this one because it's not a public hearing.
Oh, right. Okay. So seeing none, I think we close that. And then since the previous motion included an automatic motion to adjourn, I would consider that we are adjourned.
Excellent. Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.